Welcome back to the 21.8 thousand grimdark subscribers of my channel, and a friendly hello to the 55% who are not subscribed. Initially, I had plans to make an Eldar thematic list build, one focused on a very fast craft world. But I decided to pivot and make this Sunday's video on the topical issue of female Custodes. It felt a bit obligatory for a channel named What the 40k, a channel which was made with 40k critiques in mind. You guys know I like to share my thoughts and analyze after all. Plus, this is probably my favorite thumbnail in a long while. Like the title implies, the retconning switcheroo of the Custodes is not something I agree with, and in this video I will go through the reasons and rationale which inform my position. As for the unique take I can bring to this topic, my intent is to keep the social political stuff aside, and instead keep the focus dialed in on design principles, hobby elements, and the lore of 40k. I'll leave the political talking points in the hands of other content creators, as the purpose of this video is to share my 5 reasons the female aspirant Custodes retcon is in poor taste, irrespective of all of that. And I get that this is a polarizing topic, one which fans the emotional fires of those passionate, and so I think it's best to discuss it amicably, and not to turn things into a dunkfest one way or another. To discuss things rationally. You know, the way a pragmatic transhuman ought to. Your 40k. This point here is something that seems often forgotten. The adage, your 40k, implies just that. 40k is a hobby with which you can inject and create whatever you want. People have created mechanized Tyranids, or samurai space marines, or swapped loyal factions with heretic ones. Personally, I didn't like how some of the Tyranids were represented, and so I realized what I would like to see and shared them with the community. In essence, your 40k serves as a risk-free inclusionary element, a paradigm which permits extreme creativity and expression, allowing anyone to create anything. Similar to fanfiction, but it can be uniquely shared and experienced through player interaction. It's a particularly neat aspect of 40k on the tabletop, and like with any art, the public will like it or dislike it as they do. It's a paradigm which puts forth the notion that the established lore simply is, and for those inclined, it can serve as a sandbox where players are free to bend or even break those lines should they choose. When you think of it, such a paradigm would prevent any controversy like this from even occurring, due to the extreme inclusion your 40k affords. But I guess GW kinda forgot. Unless they were appealing to something else. The consequence of retcons. Like with anything, retcons can be good or bad depending on the context. If, for example, you made a trilogy of sequels, where beloved legacy characters were assassinated, where the stakes were absurd, which followed a laughable plot,
somehow Palpatine returned,
you may find a retcon would be welcomed. But looking at the case at hand, the status quo of the Custodes taking male-only aspirants simply existed. It had no developments with which to preempt a retcon, and so we have a retcon which has no mungling to address. Or in other words, a retcon aiming to change the foundational lore, which is almost always going to be a bad idea. Sure, it's possible an idea could be bad from the outset, but regardless of whether or not that's the case, if an IP heavy with lore becomes very popular, like 40k is, changing that lore will upset those fans. And upsetting your fans is not something you want to do. Put aside the moral or emotional reasons and look at it pragmatically. Those fans are the foundational core an IP and business has been built upon. And the reason you want to avoid retconning foundational, unmungled lore is because the lore is what your fans, or in other words your customers, are invested in. If the lore can change on a whim, then fans will inevitably lose their attachment to it. Or simply, change erodes the reverence for what is sacred. What even is a female transhuman? I'm posing this from a tabletop modeling point of view. Prior to the present lore update, the Adeptus Custodes were created by taking male children and radically transforming them using arcane technologies such as gene crafting and bioalchemy. It's a process so extreme that it yields a warrior which is substantially bigger and stronger than that of a space marine. With that in mind, what would such a process yield if applied to a female aspirant? Well, realistically, I don't think a female custodian would look like this. And I don't think they would look like this either. They'll probably look like this. I have a hard time imagining that a female aspirant under such an extreme transformative process wouldn't just end up nearly indistinguishable as a male aspirant would. And bringing things back to a tabletop point of view, enabling female aspirants for the Custodes surely wouldn't yield a feminine physiology or form for the models either. And so the question becomes, what is even the point? Representation in the Grimdark. Across the reactionary channels speaking on the Femstodes issue, a popular line of criticism I've noticed is the idea that advocating for representation in 40k is on the face of it absurd. The core of the reasoning is, why are you advocating for representation within a faction of space racists? And I'll start by stating, this is a bad argument.
What a twist!
Or rather, it's an inaccurate lay of the land, and levying such an argument demonstrates one's unfamiliarity with the current state of the IP. Things have changed. Don't get me wrong, the Imperium is still the xenophobic, crusading empire raging wars against anything which differs from the human race. But over several editions of 40k, it's plainly obvious the Imperium has slowly adopted a heroic bend, which contributes to the framing that the Imperium are the good guys. Or at least, they are the least bad for humanity's ability to prosper. And so with that more accurate context laid out, you can see how individuals could desire for representation in the 40k IP. Though with that said, I present the question, is the ability to see one's gender represented in a faction necessary for that faction to be enjoyed or liked? And after thinking upon it, the answer is obviously no. If I'm watching Buffy kick ass as the Slayer, I don't need to see a male Slayer doing all the badass things Buffy already does in order to enjoy Buffy's story, or the story at large, or appreciate the Slayer lore. And by that same token, a woman wouldn't need to see a female warrior in the Custodes in order to appreciate the same. Retconning Custodes to include female aspirants is in poor taste because it only serves the statement of the claim. It makes Custodes less cool, which is quite the incendiary title card, but this is the point I am most passionate about, so please indulge me. The claim isn't to imply that females are less cool. Viewers of my channel will be familiar with how I evaluate factions and subfactions. That being, it is what a faction offers uniquely which makes them appealing. Space Marines being boys only makes them more interesting, the same way the Sisters of Battle are more interesting for being all female. The same principle extends to unique niche units as well, like Slaanesh Demonettes or Eldar Howling Banshees. It gives those factions and units a unique quality over the majority of factions which are either mixed or not applicable. Now, Custodes previously being a boys-only faction was not something it held uniquely, as it was shared with the Space Marines, but the Adeptus Custodes uniquely leveraged its boys-only status for what I would claim is their best thematic element: the Talons of the Emperor. The combination, nay, the cooperation, between the Adeptus Custodes and the Sisters of Silence. I will say, as the new codex goes, I am perturbed, as I deem this 10th edition codex still poorly serves this theme from a game mechanics point of view, but that's a topic for a different video. These two factions are the most closely tied to the Emperor of Mankind. The Custodes are, or rather were, all-male transhuman warriors. The Sisters of Silence are all-female psychic blanks, which, when working together, shore up each other's respective weaknesses, becoming greater than the sum of their parts. They foil each other, in the gemstone sense. There's a strong theme here, that even the greatest men and women who are superlatively skilled with unique tools and abilities are still made greater by working together. A theme the Sisters of Battle and Space Marines aren't suited to evoke. A rather wholesome thematic attribute for the factions which sit at the top of the Imperium's hierarchy. And so, retconning Custodes to include female aspirants is in poor taste, because that theme of cooperation, which the Talons of the Emperor evoked so well, just doesn't shine as brightly. Well, that's a wrap on this one. If you enjoyed this video, there are buttons for liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thanks for watching, and a special thanks to Julius Maximus, as well as my other generous patrons and channel members. So, what do you think? Do you agree or disagree with what I presented? Let me know in the comments. Anyways, thanks again for watching, and I'll catch ya in the next one.